Welcome into another episode of the Sports Take Show where we have takes on sports. Matthew Coller and Derek Wetmore here, 1500 ESPN. Today, what we're sports taking on is Brian Dozier. And Derek, the rumors be out there. We anticipated that they would after a huge year for Brian Dozier. And John Morosi reporting that there is interest in the Twins' second baseman. What do you make of that?
Interest, unsurprising. I mean, 2 years and $15 million left on a deal for a guy who hit 42 home runs. And don't forget, he didn't hit anything in the first 2 months of the season. So his numbers look impressive on the surface, but if you dig a little deeper and remember that he's slumping and then got benched in late May before he really turned it around, those final 4 months of the season, Matthew, they're looking MVP caliber, and I don't think that's hyperbole at all. As a guy who's not all that comfortable with hot sports takes, I'm more than comfortable saying that. I'm not surprised that there's interest. I will be surprised if the Twins can find a good fit. I just think it's going to be too difficult to find a team that really needs that excess power at an up-the-middle position and is willing to give up what the Twins should be seeking. And the two things that I think they should be seeking are some sort of long-term catching future and also, much more importantly, starting pitchers. If you can find a team out there that's willing to part with a couple of young arms and or a future backstop, okay, then you start the conversation. But I'll be very skeptical until we find out those teams. Be skeptical to see if there's anybody dangling that kind of young arm that should entice the Twins.
I say trade him. I say trade him because I don't think he'll ever have another year like he had last year. I think everything connected perfectly, and he hit a bunch of home runs in a lineup where a lot of pitchers were leading, and I'm not saying that that's a huge factor for why it is. I mean, he hit the home runs. He had to take the ball deep. But it was also a year where a lot of people set career highs in home runs, and I wonder if he'll be able to repeat his results and whether the league continues to hit home runs at a massive pace. I mean, if you hit 40 home runs this year, it's less impressive than if you hit 40 home runs 2 or 3 years ago. Then you would have been the leader in the league, and last year you're just a guy who had another really good year. So I think you sell an asset like that while it is at its absolute peak, because even if he's a really good player most of the time, he's never going to have higher value than he does at this moment.
Well, I think there are two lines you have to monitor, and this is getting really, really into the weeds about how I think about trades and player valuation and all that. I think the thing that you mentioned is worth noting. It's one of the lines that you have to follow. And I'll also point out that, yeah, pitchers probably had a lead against the Twins a lot, but who's the number one person they came into series saying, we got to not let this guy beat us? It was not Miguel Sano, it was Brian Dozier. So and the fact that he did it, in 2/3 of a year. I had wrote a column in late May that, okay, the Twins are benching Brian Dozier to work on his swing. And if this doesn't fix, he still has a minor league option left, and they should absolutely exercise that if these fixes don't work. Well, he comes out, and like I mentioned, he's kind of an MVP candidate the rest of the way, so that column looks pretty stupid now. But the one line is, okay, how has he performed in the past? How do you assess that? And how do you expect him to perform going forward? And you've got to sort of measure his past performance with his immediate future performance, and in the Twins' case, it's his next 2 years. How much value do you think you're going to get for that $15 million? The other line that you have to value simultaneously, and this is where it gets tricky, is how much do other people value it, and how much would what they're willing to give up, how much would that boost your team above what Brian Dozier can give you? These are the impossible discussions. We can't really have these answers. We can just have educated guesses. But that's where I would guess you're going to be hard-pressed to find teams that really feel like Brian Dozier is the final piece of the puzzle over the next 2 years, turning 30 this May. You basically have to have a team that's ready to win the World Series or in that conversation and thinks that power from second base could be the answer and is willing to give up assets down the road to do it. It's not impossible, but I just sit here today thinking it's going to be a really tough sell for the Twins.
I think anytime you have a player that hits that many home runs in a year, you expect the world. But I think you have to ask yourself, okay, if I don't get offered the world, but I get offered a bunch of pieces that can make us good in a couple of years, well, should we consider that? Because they're probably not going to win next year.
Yeah, no question. A big part of this is, when do you think you're going to contend? If you're 3 years away, does it make sense to hang on to Brian Dozier, knowing that you're either going to lose him in free agency then, or have to sign him to a fairly rich extension, in which, sorry, history has shown you're probably going to overpay for that kind of player. Someone who's, we'll look at his aging curve and what that'll be into his mid to late 30s. But if you're going to give him a multi-year extension at the back end of this contract, that's where this conversation gets interesting. I don't know that that's really the play. So you have to decide, are we going to contend in the next 2 years with Brian Dozier? And should he be sort of the centerpiece of that offense? Or should we be taking eggs out of the 2017 basket, proverbially, and putting them into baskets down the road?
Maybe I just love trades. Can I just love trades?
Sure.